Hello, I am so excited today to be joined by the Reverend Dr. Carletta Allen, one of my United Methodist clergy colleagues. She serves as the pastor at Asbury United Methodist Church in Annapolis, Maryland, and she has been serving in these recent weeks as part of the governor's task force around faith communities as we look to reopen. And so I'm so excited that Carletta's with us today to share her experiences and her thoughts and to tell us more about how that team has worked. So Carletta, thank you for being with us today.
Thank you for having me.
Well, so let's get started. I mean, this task force, the governor just had a press conference on Wednesday, putting forth information, not just from the faith communities task force, but these other, he's had a variety of task forces working. Can you tell us about the task force that you served on, about the makeup of the group and how it worked together?
So the governor, of course, seeks wisdom from the community, from his constituents, and all across the state. And so there were 13 task forces or work groups. They use the terms interchangeably. There were 13 of those that had to do with business, and they were all located under the Department of Commerce. There were 2 other task forces or work groups that came under the Governor's Office of Community Initiatives, which is headed by Steve McAdams. And one of those was faith-based and the other was nonprofits. So those 15 groups all created final reports which were submitted to the governor and his cabinet for consideration. And in theory, those 15 reports informed what we heard on Wednesday at his conference. The group that I was a part of started out with 28, and I'm pulling up my document now with 28. One of our brothers decided after our final draft was finished that he wanted no part of that report, did not want to be associated with it in any way. So of the 27 that remained, there is a good bit of diversity. I will say that there were 25 men originally and 3 women. So not a whole lot of gender diversity. I don't know about ableness, but in terms of the makeup, there were 2 persons representing Catholicism, and they were high-level persons in their diocese. There were 5, quote, mainline Protestants, 2 of whom were United Methodist. There was me, and there was a gentleman on the Eastern Shore.
Okay.
There was a Presbyterian, but there were also, there were Sikhs, or a Sikh, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. There were 2 rabbis, a number of megachurches, non-denominational megachurches, a number of Baptist megachurches. There were, the Islamic Society was represented, Seventh-day Adventist was represented, a bilingual Christian church was represented, bilingual as in Spanish language, and the Lumbee tribe was represented.
Oh, okay.
So all around the state, they did a really good job with the geographic diversity.
Wonderful. And just give that, you mentioned that you worked on the report that the governor issued, and he talked about phase 1 on Wednesday. Did you all look just at phase 1, or, I mean, are you continuing to meet to look at other phases? What was the charge that was given to you?
No, we looked at all 3 phases.
Okay.
We started with phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, and made recommendations for each. At the end of, because we actually met, we had a pre-getting to know you meeting on the Friday before, and then we had our first working meeting. We had one on Monday and Wednesday. We were broken up into 2 groups to do that work because, you know, there were 28 of us to start with. So we were broken up into groups A and B. And then on Friday, and so the respective reports were put together by a staff person. On Friday, we came back together to hash out the final report.
Okay, so you really had a pretty compressed time that you were working together.
Extremely compressed. It was a lot of, you know, I said that it reminded me of Boom.
The Board Ordained Ministry.
Yes, we had a lot of reading to do in a short period of time, a lot of information to process, and then show up and you know, and talk about this stuff.
But did you have to ask anybody to explain their understanding of Jesus as Lord?
did not come up.
So not,
Although
a little different than the Board of Ordained Ministry.
I really did want to a couple of times. As is often the case, there were a few voices that tended to dominate the conversation. And that was rather disappointing. And there was a point where because there were some persons who were sending chat messages that they were trying to get in. So at one point, because that is my nature, I did intervene to say that there are other people, other voices that need to be heard here, one of which was mine. And I didn't say an awful lot, but it was interesting. And I must say, for me, rather disappointing that we know that there is a sometimes unhealthy relationship between our political ideology and our religious practices. And that was really present in these conversations.
Can you say more about what you mean when you say that?
Well, for instance, the gentleman who left was very upset because he believes that what happened with the governor was a government overreach. He used that term numerous times, that it was a government overreach.
So he didn't think things should have been closed down at all to start with?
At all.
Okay.
Several persons believed that what the governor has done and the president is absolutely unconstitutional. So there was conversation about the unconstitutionality of interfering in religious practices. So that was present.
Okay.
And there were other voices that were trying to get back to, what our bishop has been describing as a value of human life and what this really means. But so there was tension there. That tension was always present.
And I would imagine with that compressed time, I mean, you said you had to get to know you, but we know from the groups, even the Board of Ordained Ministry, I mean, that the work gets easier as people get to know each other. I imagine that was very difficult when, having to do this really charged work with, I would imagine, little familiarity with each other prior to this.
Yes, it was. And there were two persons on this list that I knew, that I actually personally know. And I wasn't in small group with either of them. So I was in a small group of 14 and I didn't know one person there. So, you can go to their websites and try to get a sense of this person and their congregation. Certainly you get a sense of the size of their congregations, because those from the very large congregations always say so. Well, we seek 1,200. Well, we seek 4,000. That just comes up. So you get a sense of the size of the congregations. So I knew of a couple of the congregations by reputation, particularly one that is near where I am in Annapolis. But as you said, we didn't know one another. And so we've got to absorb an awful lot of information, make decisions, come together, at least have a consensus on our final draft with no prior relationship. And that always makes it harder.
Well, and as you've mentioned, I mean, the differences then between, we have a vast difference in faith communities here in the state of Maryland, represented in many ways, it sounds like, in that group. Did you sense any consistencies between types of churches that were represented? I mean, were there issues that the really large churches seemed more interested in, or positions they were more committed to than mainline Protestant? Or, you've got churches that are independent versus those that are connectional. Did those dynamics seem to affect how you all came to the table in these discussions?
I would say that a lot of it had more to do with geography than size.
Okay.
Although I'll come back to size. But the congregations to the north of Baltimore tended to be more conservative. The congregations to the south in southern Maryland and along the Eastern Shore. So an awful lot of it was more about geography than congregational size.
Well, it sounds like geography, and then associated with that, like ideology,
yes.
Politics. Okay.
Yes. Now, the size is significant because one of our early concerns in the Getting to Know You meeting, one of the early concerns was these 4 pillars that the governor has laid out have to be in place before we could gather again. And one of them had to do with having enough PPE.
Mhm.
And so it's one thing to try to get all of the cleaning supplies and masks and that kind of stuff that you need for a congregation of 140 as opposed to 4,000. And one of the concerns was that we're having trouble getting the cleaning supplies and all of that that we need in order to be able to open safely. And that's when we learned about Maryland manufacturing.
Okay. And could you
So
say more about that?
as we know that, all around the country, companies were asked to support this quote war effort by shifting their manufacturing to support the kinds of things that are needed right now to fight this war. So cleaning supplies and hand sanitizer and masks and all of that. And so the state of Maryland, again, under Commerce, the Department of Commerce, convinced, I don't know how many of them volunteered, but an awful lot of companies shifted their manufacturing to produce these. And so there is a admittedly rather clunky website that is Maryland Manufacturing. Once you get in though, it's pretty straightforward, but all of these companies, there's a list, a grid of what they are making, what they offer, and then you fill out a little contact me form, and then you're contacted by the company. They tell you what they have, how fast they can get it to you. So it's pretty straightforward.
Okay.
So that was very helpful because, there's more out there than Amazon or Walmart.com.
Mm-hmm. So of the four pieces, that was the one that folks seem the most concerned about. Can you say a word about the other three key pieces that the team discussed as essential before churches or faith communities should gather again?
One of the things that ended up being most shocking at the governor's press conference was that 50% number. Mm-hmm. Having a right-sized congregation come back that can be kept safe. That was a concern because one of the things in terms of hygiene that needs to happen is that our facilities need to be, of course, completely disinfected and sanitized before people arrive. And then they need to be disinfected and sanitized before anyone else arrives. So they've got to be cleaned and all of that between services. Mm-hmm. So that was a real concern for people of how do you just logistically, how do you do that? I mean, if you see 4,000 and you already have 4 services, then you're talking about adding more services and you have to have a thorough cleaning in between each service. So that was a real concern, especially for people who have very large congregations and are expecting a lot of people to show up. Mm-hmm.
So, go ahead.
And the congregation's got to be prepared for that. I mean, you're talking about a big operation. You've got to train people about how we'll be coming back. You've got to train people to do the cleaning and do all of that. There was a lot of conversation about initially they wanted us to use only one door in and one door out and control how that happened. And again, for a congregation that seats 3,000, 4,000 people, that's just not, that's not something that's going to work real well. You're talking about huge campuses, huge parking lots. So all of that was in the mix. What do you do about the kids and those spaces? So the bigger the congregation, the more that's an issue. Okay.
And you mentioned kind of the surprise at the governor's saying 50% at the press conference. What had you expected it to be? And what's your understanding of why it wasn't what you expected it to be?
Well, we didn't expect him to float a number like that at all. We didn't. And our hope was that he would trust us to be able to look at his guidelines and act accordingly. So when we actually heard the 50% number, it was shocking to all of us. And evidently there was an awful lot of immediate backlash because as the governor was answering questions from the press at his press conference, we got an email that there would be a call meeting on the following day at 11 o'clock. And that was the first thing that was brought up. And what they said was that the commerce side agreed to 50% capacity for retail establishments. And the legal team said that if it was 50% capacity for the retail side, it had to be 50% capacity for worship spaces as well. or they could be open to a discrimination suit.
As we've seen, unfortunately, in other states. So we know that this is happening, and there are folks out there waiting to bring these lawsuits,
Yes.
unfortunately. So am I hearing that at least some of the team, it sounds like maybe, I mean, were there some on the team who wanted to be able to have greater than 50% capacity, but others who thought it should be less than 50%, or the team just thought that local churches should decide as long as they're meeting the social distancing and kind of doing meeting all the other requirements they need to?
All of the above. There are folks that have already done the math and they're pretty clear about what they could feel comfortable bringing people in at, and that we could be trusted to use our intelligence and our wisdom to do that. There are people who feel that anyone who wants to come should be allowed to come because the governor and the president should never have told us not to in the first place. And there are, for instance, there are people who are, when people do come back, they're going to have every other row and 6 to 7 feet between each, body or family group.
Right.
There are those who are planning to use every row. So one of the things that helped everybody was the fact that the governor made it clear in his press conference that local jurisdictions would be able to make decisions based on the science in their areas.
Right, and we've seen that already.
That's right.
Yeah.
And they had 48 hours, we learned on the call. They had the county executives, because they spent a lot of time. All the county executives spent a lot of time with the governor on the telephone the day before. And so they had 48 hours from the governor's press conference to make their own determinations about what was safe in their jurisdictions. And I think that our county executive here in Anne Arundel County was one of the first to say that, no, it was too soon for worship.
Okay.
And he made some other adjustments.
But as the team was working then through all of these things and kind of coming to the understanding that social distancing was going to need to be part of the plan, that wearing the personal protective equipment, hand sanitizers, cleaning, all of that, did you have any health experts that were informing the work, or was the guidance, what guided your discussions, kind of the understanding that people came into the meetings with, or did they provide any experts there as your group worked together?
That's a great question. And that came up, at least in my small group, when we met on Monday, that we wish that there had been medical experts there. Steve Shue, who is the head of MEMA, Maryland Emergency Management, was there. And there were a couple of other persons from the cabinet there, but there were not medical experts there. And so our group said that it would be very helpful to have medical experts present. They're pretty busy right now, these medical experts. So we were referred to the wisdom of our own jurisdictional health officers. Okay. And they did take our questions back to the experts that they're using. Again, they gave us more data, more information to read about the science and what's already been out there. And I understand that. Those folk are really busy right now trying to save lives. None of them are sleeping 7 hours a night. So we did have access to the data, but those persons were not present on the calls.
Okay. I would imagine you mentioned earlier the dynamic of people kind of coming with the ideology, with their political view. I was sharing with my husband yesterday, it's been so disappointing that even in all of this, we fall into the same political camps. The first couple of weeks, it seemed like we all were together, but now we're falling into the same patterns. But that if people are coming to those discussions with the understandings they have already, that it just reinforces that rather than trying to getting folks on the same page.
Yes, it does. Yes, it does.
Well, as you came to those discussions, what were some of your understandings of the public health situation, some of the characteristics of this virus that shaped your approach to the discussions in this task force?
You and I are fortunate because we are part of a connectional system, an Episcopal system. So we have the prayerful guidance and wisdom of our bishop and the cabinet, but we also have a great deal of autonomy. We are the boots on the ground. We know our congregations. We know our flocks. And I serve a city center congregation that began worshiping in 1803. And the people who are in my congregation are, for the most part, elderly. And they are for the most part African American, with all kinds of underlying health issues. And so I'll just be honest, I didn't need anybody to tell me that we were not going to be that we were going to be opening anytime soon. Because in addition to having to keep our most seniors, I mean, I have a lot of persons in their 80s and 90s, a lot in their 80s and 90s, and they are faithful. They come when the church is open, they come. But I didn't need to tell any of those folk that they need to stay home for quite a while. In addition, many of their adult children are either living with them or caring for them, so they're in and out of the home on a regular basis. So in my particular context, it's going to be quite a while before my members are going to feel safe coming back into worship. That's just the reality. When you look at that many aged people and that many 60 to 70-year-old folk who are caring for them and living with them, it's just downright dangerous. It just is. One of the things that came up was singing, because singing is really important in a lot of our traditions, not in all of them, but singing is very important in our Protestant tradition, in our ethnic traditions. It's important to our Jewish brothers and sisters. It's important to Hispanics. You know, worship is la fiesta. So singing, there was a lot of conversation about that. And there are people who cannot imagine coming to worship without being able to sing unmasked. Therefore, it's probably not safe then. If it's not safe to sing because we worry about this virus being communicated in that way, then it's probably not safe for us to gather. And so that's pretty much where we came with that. And of course, not singing was in our report.
Right.
And that has
the concern being that the action of singing propels the droplets with the virus far beyond the 6 or 7 foot social distancing guidelines.
Exactly. I mean, it can be 12 to 16 feet, we're told. And that's just for those of us who just sing regularly. For choirs who are really, doing all, I'm not a choir person, for all that is required with that kind of singing, you're talking about even more. There were folk who were saying, well, we'll have soloists and we'll have them strategically placed around the sanctuary. But again, that aspirant lingers in the air, so people are still exposed. So there was just simply nothing easy about how to make worship safe again. Just the idea that we have to talk about how to make our coming together safe again is bizarre. But we do need to talk about that because it's so important to us. And yet, as I said, in my context, this is not hard because I don't have people who are clamoring to get back in as much as they miss it. And we're doing Zoom and Facebook Live right now. We'll add YouTube at some point, but we were way behind in the technology curve. So I'm really proud that we've gotten this far. And so I am in the sanctuary on Sunday mornings, all by myself. Everybody else is at home, but I am there. I am there and right there at the communion table. And that little detail is so important to people. At least our pastor is in that place that we love, but they are really clear that they can't be right now.
And, part of, I know, most of us have nothing like the experience of shutting down church for this length of time. The possibly closest that we've ever had as pastors or as church leaders is thinking about snow days. And I know you and I have we've had discussions online. I mean, all of us, when there's snow coming, we all start pinging each other to say, are you closing? Are you not? And there is this responsibility as a pastor, because as you've mentioned, some folks who shouldn't come will try, even if you have it. Can you speak about how you as a pastor approach your responsibility in making these sorts of decisions when sometimes folks will not make the decision that is in their best interest? And as a pastor, you kind of have to hold that for them a little bit.
I love that question. I shared an article on social media day before yesterday, about a congregation in Canada. And this was before the prime minister, put them on lockdown still, but they gathered for a special, I think it was a birthday celebration. And not everyone in the congregation came, but about half of them did. And of the half who came, half contracted COVID-19, and 3 of them died. I would not want to be that pastor. Many years ago, in my very first solo appointment, I had a 2-point charge in Carroll County. And there were times there that, there was an inch or 2 or 3. And, I'm a city girl, come on, we can do this. And so I was planning to have worship on a Sunday because it had only been like 2 inches or something. And I got a call from one of the matriarchs of the Cooksville church. I will never forget that. It was clearly a summons. And she was disabled, and she was sitting there in her favorite chair in her room. And she said, "Pastor, you need to understand something. You are the under shepherd and the head of this congregation, or this church," she said. "If you open the doors to the church, people will come because you opened the doors of the church, and they will respect that. And some of the people who will come have no business being out there. And somebody is going to fall. And when we fall, we break a hip. And when we break a hip, we get pneumonia and we die." I will never forget that. We fall, we break a hip, we get pneumonia, and we die. And she just let that hang there for what seemed like forever to me. And she leaned in and said, "If I was you, Pastor, I wouldn't want that on my conscience." And then she dismissed me. And so, I'm a young pastor, and I'm thinking, I've got all this internal conversation going on, but I never forgot that. It was exactly what I needed to hear, that they will come because they trust me. And if I've opened the doors to the church, then clearly I've cleared it with God. There's a hedge of protection around them. It will be safe. And I just think about this Canadian pastor. I would never want, as she said, to have that on my conscience, that I opened the doors and people trusted me, and half of them got sick and some died. So that's what guides me.
And so thank you so much for sharing that. And as you think then about that heavy responsibility, what are some of the factors, both external factors in terms of what is happening around us with the virus, whether it's infection rates, hospitalization rates, and what are some of the practices that you would want to have in church, so external and internal factors that would make you feel comfortable restarting in-person gatherings? What's going to be that point for you?
That is so hard, because what I'm hearing from scientists and physicians that I trust is that what we need is a lot more testing, and we need a vaccine and or treatment for this, because right now they're trying all kinds of things for the sickest. But what I hear is that even if this aggressive testing results in a vaccine by spring of 2021, it still has to be tested and get approval. So we're talking about conceivably not having an approved vaccine before fall of 2021 at the very earliest. I can't imagine not gathering for worship for that long. I just can't. It's painful to think of. And yet, I need to know that we are capable of doing everything that we can do to keep people safe. Certainly, we're going to need to have a hybrid, at the very least, a hybrid for a very long time. Actually, I hope that never goes away, because we have picked up about a dozen people who couldn't make it to worship, who are now worshiping with us because they've got somebody in the family who can hook them up on Zoom or Facebook Live. So it needs not to go away anyway, just because we need to learn how to be the church in the 21st century. But it's just going to be a long time. I had said to my leadership team that I don't really see us being back in the sanctuary before fall, like Labor Day. I just couldn't see it. Again, given how many people we have who are able to do that kind of deep cleaning that needs to be done before, and the deep cleaning after. I mean, just that logistic right there. You know, it's a sanctuary that seats 450. So it's a lot of cleaning. That's a lot of deep cleaning. The restrooms need to be disinfected and cleaned after each use. I have people who use the restroom. Services need to be shorter because of that. You know, because 2 hours in worship, somebody's going to need to use the restroom. So all of this has to be thought through. I just do not see us coming back together in the building before fall at the earliest. And as I said, my leadership team isn't rushing that.
And as you mentioned, that idea of a hybrid, not only to continue reaching these people that we've been reaching, but I imagine the same is true for you as for my folks, that some of my folks have said, even when we do reopen, they're not going to be there. So it's not as though we're going to have some reopening and we're going to go back to February numbers.
Right. Yeah. I have just done some just basic arithmetic myself, and I think that I could be comfortable with about 100 people in the sanctuary at this point. At a maximum, about 100 people. And I think that we can easily accommodate that once we get the hygiene logistics down and all of that. I think it's probably going to be about half of our worshiping population would be eligible to come back, and no more than that would come back for a while. It's going to be different. And managing expectations is so important. We do have a good bit of autonomy in our local context. And this is a time when, I mean, yes, we have a wonderful bishop, a wise bishop, and yes, we have really, really good information to help us. But we have got to make hard decisions. I mean, that's what we're there for. We've got to make hard decisions. But we've also got to manage expectation. We are not going back to February of 2020. We're not, ever. We're not. We pass the peace. Passing the peace takes like 10 minutes in my congregation because people love to hug and greet and all of that. And I have said for years that the only non-medical touch that some people get in a week is the hugs they get in worship on Sunday. And so we take passing the peace very seriously. And we're not going to be able to pass the peace. I've been checking in with my members, of course, by phone, and one of my oldest member who still attends, because my oldest member is 104, but she doesn't attend. But my oldest member who still attends is 99. And her daughter came up and got her when all of this happened. And she's on the Eastern Shore with her daughter right now. And so we had a lovely conversation. She is just amazed by this Zoom thing. And we can have worship, and she just loves it. She just loves this Zoom. We're just Zooming. And she said, Pastor, you know, when we come back to church, we're not going to be able to hug like we used to and do all those things we used to do. She's 99, and she knows that. And so I am going to Zoom her in at some point to help her be part of that managing of expectations, that we cannot go back to life as we knew it in February, not for a while, not until there's a vaccine, not until we've got herd immunity.
And so many things, like you mentioned, fellowship, singing. I know a lot of pastors are talking about their children's programs are going to be some of the very last things that restart. I've heard a couple reasons for that, both because it's really hard to get kids in an enclosed area to social distance. I mean, it's hard for grown-ups, but also I know so many folks are wanting to get school started back up. And I heard one pastor say that they don't want to do anything in their community to negatively impact the ability for schools to reopen at whatever point they do. They don't want the church to be a vector of infection that could impact other things. Are there other, as you talk about managing expectations, are there other things that for your congregation or for other congregations, in addition to those, that you think are going to just really feel very odd when we do restart?
Beyond the not being able to sing and hug and pass the plate and having to use one door in and out, I mean, it's all going to feel like the Twilight Zone. And I just think that this is a good time for us to look at our traditions, to go back to the book of Acts and remember that the way that we do things now is not the way we've always done things. it's a lot of it's just, this is the work that we do. We teach, we preach, we teach, we preach. And we need to help people remember that it hasn't always been like this. I know that there are pastors who have real concerns about giving. I mean, that's just real. I mean, we want to talk about lives and health and soul and all of that. But for many people, that's a very real concern. How do we keep this thing that we call church, the structure that we call church going, if giving is down, and if people realize after a while that their church are reopened, go to the church up the street that is open. I mean, all of these are the things that keep us up at night. And so we have to believe that who we are as a body matters to people. And I thank the congregation every Sunday that they are online with their church, because there's a whole lot of online worship going on right now. Beyond the television stuff, there are just a whole lot of other places they could be. And I just remind them the reason that we're here right now, with our glitchy worship, is because we love one another, we're connected to one another, and this is where we want to be. And so I just think that our clergy colleagues, we've just got to believe that. We've got to believe that the families, the ecclesias, the households that we have created matter to people, and just keep reminding people about that. I mean, if we were in a nuclear holocaust and were, in bunkers someplace and still had, outside connection, I don't think we'd be worried about the same things, but it is very similar. It's a virus. It is a killer virus. It's, to me, the same as being hunkered down in that nuclear holocaust that we were so worried about when I was a kid and growing up. Well, that hasn't happened, thanks be to God, but we've got something called COVID-19 out there. But I think we've got to believe that what God has put together, nobody can tear that apart. And if somebody does go up to the church up the street that is open, I just hope that there is a hedge of protection around them and they're safe, because I'm real worried about that. I'm worried, and I love what you just shared about clergy not wanting to do anything to hold up kids getting back in school, that we don't want to become a vector of contamination, right? Because it really is. And whenever I see people out and about without masks on, I have said to a couple of people as gently as I can, excuse me, but that's not quite 6 feet. Mm-hmm. When I'm in line, that's, and people are like, whatever. And I worry about those folks, because they may be feeling fine and shedding COVID-19 even as we stand there. Any of us, I might be. I have had 3 members who have contracted COVID-19. One of them was in a nursing home, and one of them was not. Was in their own home. One of them is about my age, and she said, I would swear I was doing everything right. How did this happen? There was a point I was very worried about the 2 who ended up on respirators, but they both pulled through. Thanks be to God, they both pulled through. The other is sheltering in place and being treated at home with telehealth. But so it's personal for me. I had 3 members who have this thing. So it's real to me, and it's real to our congregation. So somebody in their 60s, somebody in their 50s, and someone in their 80s.
And I mean, I know the concern, even though very, very rare, but there's increasing conversation about how this is affecting children in ways that we had not previously been aware. And I think for all of us, what gives us hopefully cause to pause and to take caution is just how much we don't know. And it feels like this period has gone on for so long. Every day goes so slowly for most of us. And yet, when the grand scheme of studying viruses, this is still such, novel, right? It's still so new, and it's astounding how much we don't yet know.
And what we are learning is that even though it is primarily a respiratory disease, it's affecting other organs. There's going to be long-term harm done to bodies as a result of having battled COVID-19. So, yeah, it's real.
Well, I know that one of the things that pastors are struggling to with the physical symptoms and the virus is, the other ways that we are concerned that folks aren't getting that one hug a day, that one hug a week, as you mentioned, at fellowship time. And as much as we try as pastors to reach out and have our congregations to reach out to each other, there are other consequences, in terms of social, mental, emotional health, in terms of financial resources. Do you have any suggestions for pastors and church leaders as they're trying to minister not only to folks in the same folks with the same issues, but with some of them with additional challenges because of the restrictions that we're now living under?
One of the recommendations that was in our final report was that clergy be allowed to resume some of our ministerial functions, like visitation. That was important to everybody. Again, observing social distancing and that kind of thing. I think that we can learn from one another right now, and I think that we can be creative in ways that we hadn't imagined before. And something that I'm looking forward to doing, again, it's all got to be mapped out. And I got this from another clergy Facebook group. And this person is in a small town, and she was a self-described extrovert, and she said it was just killing her. And she also lives alone. So her own loneliness factored into this. We forget about that there are clergy who live alone and are isolated. And that can have a negative impact on our own health. There are clergy who are not alone, who kind of wish they were. There are kinds of challenges. But she just decided she couldn't stand it anymore. So she started doing drive-by visits. She was just driving from driveway to driveway, staying, right by her car and waving and having a brief conversation with people from their doorways. She did that for everyone in her congregation. Now, again, it's a small congregation, small town where she can pull that off. But I remember thinking, that's a great idea. People just need to see someone they love, their pastor, another church member. I thought, maybe it's safe enough to do that now. Again, lots of distance from the back of the driveway to their door. But I think, what would that mean to that person who hasn't had any touch, even medical touch, for 2 months, for 6 weeks, just to have their pastor or beloved church member come to their driveway and, hi, how you doing? See them. Is there anything you need? Because we think we're doing a pretty good job staying connected with people through the phone, dropping off and that kind of thing. But it's not the same. But I've got, we've got some really creative colleagues, just figure out how people can feel loved and connected during this time. I will share this, and I may get in trouble, but palms are very important to my congregation. There's something about those palms. Even people who can't make it to worship on Palm Sunday, make sure that somebody brings them a palm. And so we decided as a leadership team that we were going to make sure that everybody got their palms. And so we had, there's an awful lot of food distribution going on in our community. I don't know about anybody else's, and it's drive-by. And so we did all the hygiene protocols. We put the palms in little bags, gloved hands and all of that. And we had people out and about doing grocery shopping and picking up medicines and all that, swing by the church during a certain period of time to make sure that everybody got their palms. That was huge. There were so many tears. Of course, I couldn't see them on Palm Sunday, but people are sharing in the chat box and calling me, and there were so many tears because, again, it was just a little bit of normal, just a little bit of how it used to be. So we can find ways to continue to do those kinds of touches as we manage expectations and let people know that everything isn't going to come back. It's just not. It's not going to be like February 2020.
And it sounds like maybe as pastors, if we really can understand that and manage our own expectations, it allows us to plan differently. I mean, for the first month or two, it seemed like we were all kind of like just waiting till we could get back, and if we really understand that we've got to figure out how to do ministry in a very different way for the next year, that we do need to invest in starting some of these new ways of doing ministry because there's going to be a need.
Yes. And something that we hadn't done an awful lot of the more high-tech stuff because I didn't think we had the capacity. I didn't think we had the people who could pull that off. And it's just amazing how people mysteriously appeared who had those skills.
Necessity is the mother of invention and discovery.
On the other hand, I'm like, where the heck have you been? I mean, when were you going to tell us that you could do this? But I haven't said that. I'm just so grateful. I am so grateful. And we're all learning together, and we need to grow that team. But I tell you, as a relatively young person compared to my congregation, and back when I was in my 30s and 40s, I understood the wisdom of the elders. I understood that people would listen to them. People will listen to Mother B, who might not listen to me. So use the voices in your congregation that people admire and respect and will listen to. You can believe I'm going to have Mother B zoomed in so she can say, we can't go back to hugging like we used. She calls everybody baby. Baby, we can't go back to hugging like we used to because that Rona is just killing people. They need to hear it from Mother B. They need to hear, and don't you forget to mail in your tithes too, because we still got to pay the bills. They need to hear that from the 80-year-old person who is still tithing and giving extra. So, we've got to be creative because this is a long haul. I'm worried about, I understand that we want to get back together. I understand that we want to hug and love on our people, but I'm worried about people who don't get that this is a long-term thing.
Well, Carletta, I'm so grateful for your sharing with us and for your work on our behalf on the task force and sharing with that. Is that task force going to continue meeting, or are you guys kind of done? Or
yeah, at the very end, given how much tension there was when we were hashing out the final report, one of our brothers asked if we could continue to get together from time to time to see how this is all working. And so Steve McAdams said that they would make that happen. So I thought we'd be finished as of last week, but evidently we're not. So
it's like every other church committee ever. You're told it's only and it just lasts forever.
So I also look forward to actually getting to meet some of these people less. Because some of these people on this committee, I think that I would really enjoy being in fellowship with as a clergy colleague. So so it's great. And by the way, if anyone wonders how it was that I came to be asked to be on this task force, I live and work in Annapolis. And the church that I serve, Asbury, is the historical church here. So Asbury has a certain reputation. So whenever there is a change in administration, elected persons and or their surrogates always come to meet the pastor of Asbury. And so I develop a relationship with every administration. I don't care what their label is. I have to work with these folk, and they are leading us and making decisions on our behalf. So I want to know those folk and have a good relationship with them. And so that is what happened. When the governor was elected, one of the people from the Office of Community Initiatives reached out, and she said I was one of 3 pastors in the area that responded to her. Mm. Only 3. Mm. And I thought that was unfortunate. Mm. So she knows my name. So when they were looking for persons, she said, well, of course she calls me Dr. C. Of course, we have to have Dr. C on this. So that's how I ended up being there. So I shared that to say that whatever our own ideologies are, the people who are elected, whether we voted for them or not, the people who are elected are making decisions on our behalf. So we need to know them and work with them.
Absolutely. And I know, beyond the forming the relationships you talked about, you're very heavily involved in the community. Not all pastors are, but I know that there are many organizations working that you are part of and working with first responders and chaplain roles. And so I think that probably I'm sure that the respect and the invitation to be part of some of this goes beyond just the fact that you responded to an office of the governor, but the respect that folks in that Annapolis community have for your involvement beyond the walls of your church. And so I thank you for that and for your work on this task force. Is there anything else that you want to share Anything else that you think it's important for folks to know before we draw things to a close?
Jesus is Lord.
There you go. And what is your understanding of Jesus? We'll do another video on that. We'll do Carletta's Cliff Notes for the Board of Ordained Ministry exam.
Be well, my sister.
Thank you. Thank you so much for joining us.
It was a pleasure.